You talk about men and gender and masculinity in a way that to me seems quite both empathetic but also realistic when it comes to men and boys without falling into what some might describe as sort of like a men's rights activist type umbrella and dismiss what you say. I've actually been really interested about a lot of the things that you've talked about modern masculinity. Do you find that there is a desire from those who listen to your commentary on gender and men? There's a desire to put you either on this side or that side, or that there really is a sort of welcoming of the way you want to discuss it, which I think is much more nuanced than many others.
Thanks for the question. It's a thoughtful question. It's changed a lot. If you advocated for young men 2 years ago and said that, when it was 60-40 male female in college, and now it's reversed, but we're not talking about it, people saw it as a zero sum game. And they immediately conflated advocating for young men or highlighting some of the struggles young men face as being misogynist. You couldn't be pro male without being anti female. And over the last 24 months, it's changed. And unfortunately, I think some of that is because a lot of the kind of there was a lot of thinly veiled misogyny masking is pro male. I think some of the celebrities or people on TikTok that have gotten some attention, it's just blatantly a fairly conservative. There's some troubling aspects to some of the people who've been labeled as pro male, and that is they're blaming women, or that some of their content does come off as misogynist. So I don't think that's helped have a serious conversation. But you have people like Richard Reeves and talking his great book of Boys to Men.
I've read about
Even
half
some
of it so far.
feminists
Yeah.
have said, look, this is clearly an issue. And the group I hear from three cohorts. I hear from young men, and oftentimes they're upset because they think I'm accusing them of being incels. And so I get both positive and negative feedback from young men. I get some negative feedback from young women who feel as if, look, where were you? Men have had a 400-year head start. Where were you when women were struggling? And I would argue, well, I think we were there for women, and we still have work to do, but I think society has been there. The people I get the most support from, hands down, are mothers. And the conversation goes something like this. I have two daughters, one's at Penn, one's in PR in Chicago, both killing it. And I have a son who's in the basement vaping and playing video games.
Mm.
And the data is just overwhelming. And we're finally having an honest conversation about the fact that 3 times as likely to be addicted, 4 times as likely to kill themselves, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. For every 1 male college graduate in the next 5 years, we're going to have 2 female college graduates. So there are real issues here. And also there's an emerging class or recognition that the people who would like more economically and emotionally viable young men is women. So I think we're finally having what I'd call a civil conversation around it.
One of the things that I find really interesting, and I hope I'm summarizing some of the things you've written and said accurately, and if not, I'm sure you'll tell me, is that you point out, or I at least interpret some of the things you say as pointing out, that some of the grievances that maybe the more right-leaning folks on this issue have about the state of young men are a direct result of some of the cultural shifts and norms and stories that are told by those very people in terms of, I'll give a few examples. What is masculine when it comes to parenting, as an example, and these images of and stereotypes of, hey, the dad pushing around the stroller rather than working, that's not masculine in the way that it should be, as an example, or that's my example, not yours necessarily. Mm-hmm. Or stories about, empathy and being in touch with one's emotions should not be welcomed, for example, among so-called masculine men. It seems to me, and I'm curious whether you agree, that some of those stories maybe perpetuate the very problems that you're pointing out.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because I think masculinity is a wonderful thing, and it's been incorrectly conflated with toxicity, which is just bullshit. Toxic masculinity is a term that has really been destructive because there are just certain situations where people want to demonstrate masculinity. And the key is to define what it means. I think it means being more risk aggressive. It means taking chances. Uh, if I tried to distill a modern or a mature form of masculinity down to a statement, it would be acquiring skills and strengths such that you can protect and advocate for others. And by the way, masculinity is not the sole domain of people born as men. I think a lot of women demonstrate masculinity. I think a lot of men demonstrate wonderful feminine attributes. I'm kind of, most of my friends I would describe as having more feminine attributes than the majority of men. But let's celebrate femininity and the wonderful things it brings to the fore, and also masculinity. So I believe, for example, and I've gotten shit for saying this, I think every man should take economic responsibility for their household. And by the way, sometimes that means recognizing, as much as it may hurt, that your partner is better at that whole money thing than you and taking more responsibility for supporting her career, his career, and getting out of the way. I think that's a masculine attribute. Somebody, and ideally both of you, need to take economic responsibility for the household. I think being really, really strong and having incredible grit and resilience, lifting heavy weights, running long distances in your mind and in the gym is a wonderful thing. Men are stronger than women. Lean into that. They're stronger physically. Women are stronger in terms of their ability to endure. They have much higher threshold for pain. Otherwise, they would never survive childbirth.
Yeah.
But I say to young men, if you are not strong, you should be able to walk in any room and have the confidence that if shit got real, you could kill and eat everybody or outrun them. And I'm not suggesting you do either of those things, but I'm suggesting it's a wonderful thing to lean into, and there's nothing wrong with it. And then what do you do with that strength? You're more confident, you're more kind. In certain situations, you de-escalate the situation. The strongest, most impressive men I've ever met in a bar fight are the ones that step in and de-escalate the situation. That's what it means to be a man. That's what it means to express masculinity. So I like the idea of trying to define, if you're Tarzan, what vines you're going to swing on. Masculinity for me when I was, you look like a very young man, David, but when I was young, I thought masculinity meant being awesome, sleeping with as many strange women as possible, and being ripped. I didn't go into the gym to get fit. I went in to be big. And now as I've gotten older, I find that being civic, voting, being friendly to your neighbors, taking an interest in a child that isn't yours. I think that being really strong, now for my age, and I hate to say that, I have to qualify everything for my age, those things make me feel strong like bull. And I'm leaning into those things. I love those things. I love making and spending a lot of money. I love protecting people. And I'm doing a lot of virtue signaling right now. But those are masculine attributes. I'm a risk aggressive person. I've started businesses. And there's nothing, and I'm physical on a lot of dimensions. And those are wonderful attributes. And by the way, women can demonstrate those attributes. But masculinity should be absolutely celebrated. When Ukrainians or when Russians pour over the border, as Bill Maher said, the Ukrainian army, you want some of that big energy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think we need to celebrate it. It comes with downsides. It comes with upsides, as does every other attribute of the species. But I'd say lean into it and just define what it means. And we need a more mature version of masculinity.